Hello there, listeners. Before we dive into tonight's story, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. I'm curious about your corner of the globe. What time is it where you're listening? How has your day been treating you? If you're enjoying these deep dives into the stories that make us question everything we think we know, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. Your support helps us continue exploring these fascinating and often unsettling narratives that blur the line between fiction and reality. Now let's begin our journey into a world where peace itself becomes the enemy, and war transforms from necessity into industry. The fluorescent lights of Xeraxon Systems' basement archive hummed with the persistence of a dying insect. Caleb Voss adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and squinted at the monitor, displaying what appeared to be his career's most mundane assignment: auditing retired black budget contracts from the Iraq-Afghanistan era. The year was 2026, and the so-called peace dividend had finally arrived. America's longest wars were over, defense spending was being scrutinized, and companies like Xeraxon were scrambling to justify their bloated contracts from the glory days of endless conflict. At 28, Caleb had spent 3 years as a junior data analyst, believing he was contributing to national security through spreadsheets and database queries. His cubicle on the 7th floor of the Crystal Tower in Arlington was a monument to bureaucratic tedium, decorated with motivational posters about excellence in defense and protecting freedom through innovation. But today, buried in the building's depths among servers that stored decades of classified procurement data, something felt different. The invoice file he'd been assigned contained the standard litany of inflated costs: $30 bolts, $100 hammers, $1,000 toilet seats. But embedded in the metadata, almost invisible unless you knew how to look, were references that made his pulse quicken. Echo Spectre Initiative appeared 17 times across different contracts, none of which had any corresponding program documentation in the official archives. Caleb's fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing urgency. Echo Spectre Initiative. The name felt like a whisper from a ghost that had never officially existed. He cross-referenced the term against every database he had access to, but the searches returned nothing. Not classified, not redacted, not even denied. Simply nothing, as if the program had been surgically removed from institutional memory. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor. "How's the audit going? Need anything exciting for the report?" Caleb stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Just the usual waste and inefficiency. Nothing newsworthy. But his eyes had already returned to the screen where a new document had loaded. An internal memo dated 15 years ago, buried in a folder marked Quarterly Reviews, Archive Division. The header read, Operational Continuity Assessment, Q3 2011. Most of the content dealt with standard logistical concerns, but halfway down the page, a single line made his blood run cold. Maintain theatre activity. Peace destabilizes asset flow. The memo was unsigned, but the routing information showed it had been distributed to the senior leadership of 3 major defense contractors: Xeraxon Systems, Aeromatrix Defense, and Kinex Global. The same companies that had profited most from the 2-decade war cycle that was now supposedly ending. Caleb printed the document, his hands trembling slightly as the pages emerged from the laser printer. The basement archive was empty except for him, the silence broken only by the whisper of ventilation and the distant hum of servers processing the digital remnants of America's military adventures. He folded the pages carefully and slipped them into his jacket pocket, a motion that felt like crossing a line he hadn't known existed. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt interminable. His colleagues moved through their routines with practiced efficiency, analysing contracts, preparing reports, attending meetings about meetings. The normalcy of it all suddenly seemed surreal, like a theatrical performance staged for an audience that didn't know it was watching a play. That evening, Caleb sat in his Arlington apartment, staring at the printed memo spread across his coffee table. The words, "Peace destabilizes asset flow," seemed to pulse with malevolent life. He opened his laptop and began researching the 3 companies mentioned in the routing information. What he found was a web of connections that stretched from the Pentagon to Capitol Hill, from boardrooms to think tanks, from retired generals to sitting congressmen. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Military officers approved contracts with defence contractors, then retired to lucrative positions with the same companies whose proposals they had once evaluated. Former CIA directors became lobbyists for weapons manufacturers. Ex-Pentagon officials joined corporate boards, bringing with them classified insights into future procurement needs. The revolving door between government and industry didn't just exist. It was the primary mechanism by which the system perpetuated itself. But something about the Echo-Spectre references suggested this went deeper than garden variety corruption. The program name appeared in contexts that implied operational capability, not just financial arrangements. References to theatre activation protocols and instability metrics suggested that someone had been not just profiting from war, but actively working to ensure it continued. Caleb's research led him to a series of articles published 3 years earlier by a journalist named Ava Merrick. Her pieces for the national interest had examined the financial incentives that prolonged military conflicts, tracing money flows between defence contractors and the officials who approved their contracts. The articles had been thorough, well documented and devastating in their implications. They had also been her last published work. According to her professional profile, Ava Merrick had been pursuing other opportunities since 2023. Her social media accounts had gone dark, her byline had disappeared from major publications, and her name had been quietly removed from journalism award nominations she'd previously received. It took Caleb 2 days to find her. She was working part-time at a small non-profit that provided legal aid to veterans, her journalism career apparently over. When he called the organisation, the receptionist hesitated before agreeing to pass along a message. "Tell her it's about Echo-Spectre," Caleb said. "Tell her someone found more pieces of the puzzle." The call came that evening. Ava Merrick's voice was cautious, professionally pleasant, with an undertone of wariness that spoke to hard-won experience. "Mr. Voss, I understand you wanted to speak with me about some research you've been doing. I found references to something called the Echo-Spectre Initiative in defence contracting records. Your article suggested you were investigating similar patterns of coordination between industry and government." There was a long pause. "Where are you calling from?" "My apartment." "Why?" "Because if you're really onto something, that's the last place we should discuss it. There's a coffee shop called The Grind on Wilson Boulevard. Tomorrow, 2 p.m, come alone and bring whatever you found." The line went dead. Caleb spent the night reading everything he could find about Ava Merrick. Her journalism had been meticulous, focusing on the intersection of defence policy and private profit. Her last major piece, published just before her career apparently ended, had examined what she called the privatisation of foreign policy, arguing that corporate interests had begun to shape military decisions more than strategic considerations. The article had been published on a Friday. By the following Monday, sources quoted in the piece had recanted their statements, claiming they had been misquoted or taken out of context. Within 2 weeks, major news outlets were running articles questioning Merrick's methodology and suggesting she had relied on unsubstantiated claims from unreliable sources. The speed and coordination of the response suggested something more systematic than organic criticism. Someone had mobilised significant resources to discredit her work, and they had done so with the efficiency of a military operation. The next afternoon, Caleb arrived at The Grind 15 minutes early. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover for conversation, but not so crowded that they couldn't find a quiet corner. He ordered a double espresso and found a table with a view of the entrance, his stomach tight with anxiety. Ava Merrick was younger than he had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of sharp intelligence that seemed to catalogue every detail of her surroundings. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a leather satchel that looked like it had seen extensive use. Her handshake was firm, her smile professionally warm but guarded. "You look nervous," she said as she settled into her chair with a cup of black coffee. "I feel like I'm in over my head." "That's a rational response. Show me what you found." Caleb slid the printed memo across the table. Ava's expression didn't change as she read, but her grip on the coffee cup tightened slightly. "Where did you get this?" "Defense Contractor Archives. I'm auditing old contracts, and this was buried in the metadata of some procurement files." "And you think this relates to EchoSpectre?" "The initiative is referenced in multiple contracts, but there's no official record of any program by that name. It's like it was scrubbed from the system." Ava was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the coffee shop's windows. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. 3 years ago, I was investigating exactly what you've stumbled onto. The EchoSpectre initiative wasn't just a program, Mr. Voss. It was a coordination mechanism, a way for defence contractors and government officials to ensure that conflicts remained profitable. What you're reading isn't waste or inefficiency. It's the blueprint for forever war. But why would anyone want to prolong conflicts? The human cost alone. Because war is the most profitable industry in human history, and peace is its greatest threat. Every missile fired needs to be replaced. Every base established needs to be supplied. Every conflict creates demand for new technologies, new systems, new contracts. The moment peace breaks out, the revenue stream stops. Caleb felt the foundations of his worldview shifting. So they deliberately prolonged the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not just prolonged, managed, calibrated. The goal wasn't victory or defeat, it was sustainability. Keep the conflicts intense enough to justify massive spending, but never so intense that they end quickly. And EchoSpectre was coordinating this? EchoSpectre was the coordination mechanism, a network of officials, contractors and policymakers who ensured that peace never became profitable enough to pursue. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the implications settling around them like a toxic cloud. Finally, Ava reached into her satchel and pulled out a small notebook. "I'm going to give you some names, people who might be able to help you understand what you're really dealing with. But I want you to understand something first. The moment you start digging into this, you become a threat to a system that has generated trillions of dollars in profit. They ended my career with a whisper campaign. They could do much worse to you. Why are you helping me? Because someone needs to know the truth. Because maybe you can get further than I did. Because the alternative is letting them win." She wrote quickly, tearing the page from her notebook and sliding it across the table. These people went underground after their careers were destroyed. Finding them won't be easy, but they might be able to tell you what EchoSpectre really was. Caleb glanced at the names. Dr. Linnea Drex, former psychological warfare expert. Marcus Webb, ex-Pentagon auditor. Jennifer Kim, former CIA analyst. 3 people whose careers had apparently ended as abruptly as Ava's. What happened to them? Same thing that happened to me. They asked the wrong questions and got the wrong answers. Drex was studying how conflicts could be artificially prolonged. Webb was tracking money flows between contractors and government officials. Kim was analysing intelligence reports that suggested some conflicts were being deliberately escalated. And their careers just ended? Budgets were cut, security clearances were revoked, personal scandals surfaced. The system has antibodies, Mr. Voss. It knows how to protect itself. Caleb folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his wallet. What should I do next? Be very careful. Don't use your work computers for research. Don't discuss this with colleagues. Don't leave digital footprints if you can help it. And if you start to feel like you're being watched, trust that instinct. They parted ways outside the coffee shop, Ava disappearing into the afternoon crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to avoid attention. Caleb walked back to his apartment, his mind racing with questions that seemed to multiply with every step. That evening he sat at his kitchen table with his personal laptop, staring at the list of names Ava had given him. The smart thing would be to forget everything he had learned, to return to his audit work and pretend the memo had never existed. But the words, "peace destabilizes asset flow," seemed to have burned themselves into his consciousness, a reminder that the system he had thought he was serving might be serving something else entirely. Dr. Linnea Drex was the first name on the list, a former Air Force psychological warfare expert who had left the service under mysterious circumstances in 2019. Her academic credentials were impressive. PhD in psychology from Stanford, Masters in International Relations from Georgetown, extensive experience in strategic communications and influence operations. But finding her current whereabouts proved nearly impossible. Her professional profiles had been scrubbed from military databases. Her academic affiliations had been quietly terminated. Even her social media presence had been systematically erased, leaving only ghost images in cached search results. After 3 days of searching, Caleb found a reference to a doctor, L. Drex, consulting for a small think tank called the Center for Strategic Analysis. The organization's website was sparse, listing only a post office box for contact information. But a reverse directory search revealed that the think tank shared an address with a yoga studio in Alexandria. The yoga studio was housed in a converted warehouse, its industrial architecture softened by hanging plants and earth-tone decorations. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, looked up from her book as Caleb approached. "I'm looking for Dr. Drex," he said. "I understand she might be associated with the Center for Strategic Analysis." The receptionist's expression shifted from casual friendliness to careful neutrality. "I'm sorry, I don't know anyone by that name." "It's about Echo Spectre," Caleb said quietly. The woman's eyes widened slightly. She reached for her phone and typed a quick message before looking back at him. "There's a meditation class starting in 10 minutes. Room B, you might find what you're looking for there." Room B was small and dimly lit, with meditation cushions arranged in a circle around a low table. Only one person was present, a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and the kind of alert stillness that suggested military training. "Mr. Voss," she said without preamble, "I was wondering when someone would find me." Dr. Linnea Drex had the compact build and direct gaze of someone accustomed to command. Her civilian clothes couldn't entirely disguise the military bearing that had been ingrained through decades of service. She gestured for him to sit across from her on one of the meditation cushions. "Ava Merrick said you might be able to help me understand what I've discovered. Ava is a good journalist and a better person. The fact that they destroyed her career tells you everything you need to know about the threat you represent. They destroyed yours too. They tried. But I had advantages they didn't anticipate. Military training, security clearances, and a very specific knowledge of how psychological operations work. When they came for me, I was ready." Drex stood and walked to a small cabinet, returning with a thick folder that looked like it had been assembled over many years. Echo Spectre wasn't just a program, Mr. Voss. It was a philosophy, a recognition that war had become too profitable to end and too important to leave to chance. The people behind it understood that modern conflicts could be managed like any other business enterprise. Managed how? By controlling the variables that determine duration and intensity. Intelligence reports could be shaped to support desired outcomes. Military strategies could be influenced to ensure conflicts remained unresolved. Political pressures could be applied to prevent diplomatic solutions. Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "You're describing a conspiracy to prolong war." "I'm describing a business model. War generates revenue. Peace eliminates it. The Echo Spectre network simply recognized this reality and acted accordingly." "What kind of network?" "Officials in the Pentagon, CIA, State Department and Congress. Executives at major defense contractors. Lobbyists, think tank analysts, and media figures, all connected by shared financial interests and mutual dependencies." Drex opened the folder and spread its contents across the low table. Documents, photographs, organizational charts, and financial records created a sprawling map of connections that stretched across the national security establishment. "This is what I was working on when they came for me," she said. "A comprehensive analysis of how the network operated, who made decisions, how information flowed, where the money went." Caleb studied the documents with growing amazement. The level of detail was extraordinary. Names, dates, financial transactions, and communication patterns that revealed the inner workings of what appeared to be a shadow government dedicated to perpetual conflict. "How did you gather all this?" 20 years in psychological operations teaches you how to read people and systems. I knew how to ask the right questions, how to find the patterns that others missed, and I had security clearances that gave me access to information that wasn't supposed to exist. Why didn't you publish this? I tried. But the moment I started reaching out to journalists, the pressure began. My clearances were reviewed. My funding was cut. My military contacts stopped returning calls. Within 6 months, I was effectively blacklisted from the entire defence establishment. So you went underground? I adapted, set up this front operation, developed new identities, learned how to operate outside the system, because I knew that eventually someone else would stumble onto what I had found. Someone like you. Caleb picked up one of the documents, a financial analysis that traced money flows between defence contractors and government officials. The numbers were staggering. Billions of dollars in contracts, millions in political contributions, hundreds of thousands in speaking fees and consulting arrangements. This is incredible work, but what can we do with it? That depends on how much you're willing to risk. The network I've mapped is still active, still profitable, still dangerous. But they're not invincible. They depend on secrecy, on the assumption that no one will see the full picture. If that assumption is wrong, they could be exposed. They could be destroyed. But the cost would be enormous. These people have access to resources that most of us can't imagine. They can end careers, destroy reputations, even threaten physical safety. Look what happened to Ava Merrick. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread before him. The scope of what they revealed was almost incomprehensible. A deliberate, systematic effort to profit from human suffering on a global scale. "What would you do?" he asked finally. "I'd be very careful about who I trusted. I'd document everything. I'd develop multiple contingency plans. And I'd remember that the moment you become a threat to them, they will respond with everything they have. But you do it." "I am doing it. Every day in small ways. Building networks, gathering information, preparing for the moment when someone with the right combination of access and courage decides to act. Someone like me? Someone like you. You have access to current information that I don't. You're inside the system in ways that could be crucial, and you're not yet damaged goods, not yet known to be a threat." Drex began collecting the documents from the table, her movements careful and precise. "I'm going to give you copies of everything I've assembled, but I need you to understand something. The moment you take this information, you become part of something that could destroy your life. Are you prepared for that?" Caleb thought about the memo he had found, about the casual way it had discussed maintaining conflicts for profit. He thought about the soldiers who had died in wars that might have been prolonged deliberately, about the families destroyed by violence that served someone else's bottom line. "Yes," he said, "I'm prepared." Dr. Drex smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. "Then let's talk about what comes next." The documents Dr. Drex had given him filled 2 banker's boxes, which Caleb had hidden in his apartment's storage closet, behind Christmas decorations and college textbooks. For 3 nights, he had pored over the materials, trying to understand the scope of what he was dealing with. The picture that emerged was more disturbing than anything he had imagined. The Echospectre network wasn't just a collection of corrupt officials and greedy contractors. It was a sophisticated system for managing conflict as a renewable resource. Wars were initiated, sustained, and concluded according to market forces rather than strategic necessity. The human cost was simply a business expense, factored into profit margins alongside equipment costs and operational overhead. At the centre of it all was a man named Harlan Rhodes, a former CIA director who had transitioned seamlessly from government service to private sector influence. Rhodes had served as CIA director from 2008 to 2012, a period that coincided with the surge in Afghanistan and the drawdown in Iraq. After leaving government, he had founded Strategic Influence Associates, a consulting firm that provided geopolitical risk assessment to defence contractors and foreign governments. But Rhodes's real innovation had been recognising that modern conflicts could be managed through information rather than traditional military force. His approach, which he had outlined in a series of classified briefings to defence industry executives, was based on what he called sustained global instability strategy. The concept was elegant in its cynicism. Rather than seeking to win or lose conflicts, the goal was to maintain them at a level that maximised profit while minimising political risk. Too much violence would generate public opposition and political pressure for withdrawal. Too little would reduce demand for military equipment and services. The sweet spot was persistent, low-level conflict that kept defence contractors profitable without creating unsustainable political costs. Caleb had found references to Rhodes's strategy in multiple documents, but the full text of his briefings remained classified. What he needed was someone who had been present for those briefings, someone who could describe Rhodes's vision in detail. The answer came from an unexpected source: Marcus Webb, the second name on Dr. Drex's list. Webb had been a Pentagon auditor who specialised in tracking defence spending. His career had ended abruptly in 2020, officially due to budget constraints, but actually because he had been asking uncomfortable questions about cost overruns and contractor relationships. Finding Webb required a different approach. Unlike Dr. Drex, who had maintained a public presence through her think tank cover, Webb had disappeared entirely from professional circles. His government pension had been reduced due to irregularities in his service record. His security clearance had been revoked. Even his professional references had been systematically discredited. But Webb had made one mistake. He had kept his membership in the Pentagon Federal Credit Union, which meant he was still receiving statements at some address. Caleb spent 2 days developing a cover story about a class action lawsuit against the government, then called the credit union claiming to need contact information for potential class members. The address led to a modest apartment complex in Silver Spring, Maryland. Webb lived in a ground floor unit with heavy curtains and multiple security cameras. When Caleb knocked on the door, the response was immediate and suspicious. "Who is it?" "My name is Caleb Voss. I'm researching the Echo Spectre initiative. Dr. Linnea Drex suggested I speak with you." The door opened to reveal a thin, nervous-looking man in his 60s. Marcus Webb had the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who had seen too much and slept too little. His apartment was Spartan, furnished with military surplus furniture and walls covered with maps, charts and photographs connected by red string. "Drex told me someone might come looking," Webb said, gesturing for Caleb to enter. "She said you had found something in the contractor archives." References to Echo Spectre in procurement documents, and a memo about maintaining conflicts for profit. Webb laughed, but there was no humour in it. "You found the tip of the iceberg. Come look at this." The far wall of Webb's apartment was covered with what appeared to be a massive organisational chart. Names, photographs, and biographical details were connected by lines of different colours, creating a web of relationships that stretched across the defence establishment. "This is what I was working on when they destroyed my career," Webb said. "A comprehensive map of how the revolving door actually operates. Not just the obvious cases of officials taking jobs with contractors, but the deeper connections, the wives and husbands and children who work for defence companies, the investment portfolios that include defence stocks, the think tank positions and board memberships and consulting contracts." Caleb studied the chart with growing amazement. The level of detail was extraordinary. Financial records, family connections, career timelines, and personal relationships that revealed the true scope of the network. "How did you compile all this?" 25 years as a Pentagon auditor. I knew how to follow money trails, how to identify suspicious patterns, how to connect dots that weren't supposed to be connected, and I had access to databases that most people don't even know exist. Webb moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. But the real breakthrough came when I started attending Harlan Rhodes's briefings. He would give presentations to defence executives about managing global instability as a business strategy. The man was essentially teaching them how to profit from perpetual war. Dr. Drex mentioned those briefings. "Do you have copies?" "Better than that, I have recordings." Webb connected a small digital recorder to his laptop, and Harlan Rhodes's voice filled the room. The recording quality was poor, but the content was chilling. "The traditional model of warfare," Rhodes was saying, "assumes that conflicts have natural endpoints: victory, defeat, or negotiated settlement. But this model is fundamentally flawed from a business perspective. Every ended conflict represents lost revenue, terminated contracts, and reduced strategic relevance." The sustained global instability strategy recognizes that modern conflicts can be managed like any other business process. Key variables include threat assessment, resource allocation, and strategic communications. By controlling these variables, we can ensure that conflicts remain profitable for all stakeholders. Consider the Afghanistan theatre. Traditional military thinking would focus on defeating the Taliban and establishing stable governance. But this approach eliminates the need for continued military presence and support. Instead, we maintain sufficient pressure to prevent Taliban victory, while ensuring that government forces remain dependent on our support systems. The recording continued for another hour, Rhodes explaining in clinical detail how conflicts could be calibrated to maximise profit, while minimising political risk. He discussed instability metrics and profit optimisation algorithms, as if he were describing manufacturing processes rather than human lives. "This is incredible," Caleb said when the recording ended. "It's a blueprint for exactly what you and Dr. Drex have been describing." "It's more than that," Webb replied. "It's evidence, proof that the Ecospectre network was deliberately prolonging conflicts for profit. Rhodes was essentially teaching defence contractors how to become war profiteers." How many people heard these briefings? Dozens. Senior executives from every major defence contractor, Pentagon officials, intelligence community leaders, congressional staff. The network was much larger than most people realise. Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. What happened to the other people who heard these briefings? Did any of them speak out? Some tried, but Rhodes was very careful about who he trusted with sensitive information. Most of the people in those briefings were already compromised, already part of the network. The few who showed signs of developing a conscience were dealt with quickly. Dealt with how? Career destruction usually. Security clearances revoked, professional reputations destroyed, personal scandals mysteriously surfaced. The network had sophisticated methods for neutralizing threats. Webb moved to his computer and opened a spreadsheet containing hundreds of names. "I've been tracking what happened to people who might have posed a threat to the network. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Careers ended abruptly, often for seemingly unrelated reasons, but the timing always coincided with periods when they were asking uncomfortable questions or showing signs of moral discomfort. People like Ava Merrick? Exactly like Ava Merrick. She got too close to the truth, so they destroyed her professionally. Standard operating procedure for the network." Caleb studied the spreadsheet, recognising some of the names from his own research. "Is she safe now?" "As long as she stays quiet and doesn't pose a threat, probably. But the moment she starts investigating again, or tries to publish new material, they'll come after her with everything they have." "What about us? Are we safe?" Webb laughed again, the same humourless sound as before. "Safe? Number. We're already on their radar. The moment you started pulling those archive files, someone noticed. The moment you met with Ava Merrick, someone took note. The moment you found Dr. Drex, someone started watching. How do you know? Because I've been watching them watch us. Look at this." Webb opened another file on his computer, this one containing surveillance photographs. The images showed Caleb entering and leaving his apartment building, arriving at work, meeting with Ava Merrick at the coffee shop. "They've been documenting your activities for weeks. Standard protocol when someone starts asking dangerous questions. They want to know who you're talking to, what you're learning, how much of a threat you represent." Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the apartment's temperature. Why haven't they moved against me? Because they're still assessing the situation. You're not yet a confirmed threat, just a potential one. They're waiting to see what you do next, who you contact, whether you can be managed or need to be eliminated. Eliminated? Professionally usually. They prefer to destroy careers rather than create martyrs. But they're not squeamish about escalation if necessary. Webb closed the laptop and returned to his wall chart. The network's power comes from its ability to operate in shadows, to maintain the illusion that defense policy is driven by strategic rather than financial considerations. But they're not invincible. They can be exposed, their methods can be revealed, their network can be dismantled. How? By doing what they fear most, bringing their activities into the light. The network depends on secrecy. on the assumption that no one will see the full picture. If that assumption is wrong, if someone can assemble enough evidence to make their activities undeniable, they lose everything. Someone like us? Someone like us. But it would have to be done very carefully with extensive documentation and multiple sources, and we'd need protection, some way to ensure that the evidence reaches the public even if we're neutralised. Caleb thought about the documents he had already collected, about the recordings he had just heard, about the scope of what they were dealing with. What would you need to make this work? More evidence, current information about Echo Spectre operations, documentation of ongoing activities, not just historical records, and most importantly, we'd need someone inside the network who could provide real-time intelligence about their plans. Do you know anyone who might help? Webb was quiet for a long moment, staring at his wall chart. There's one person, Jennifer Kim, the third name on Dr. Drex's list. She was a CIA analyst who worked closely with Rhodes before his transition to the private sector. She knows where the bodies are buried, both literally and figuratively. But she's the most dangerous contact we could make. Kim didn't just lose her career when she crossed the network. She lost her identity, her family, her entire life. She's been underground for 5 years, and she's developed a serious paranoia about anyone who tries to contact her. How do we reach her? Very carefully. Kim has established protocols for contact, dead drops, and coded messages and security procedures that would make a Cold War spy proud. And she's armed, trained, and absolutely convinced that the network is trying to kill her. Is she right? Webb looked at the surveillance photographs on his desk. Probably. That evening, Caleb returned to his apartment with a new understanding of the risks he was facing. The evidence was overwhelming. A systematic effort to profit from perpetual conflict, managed by a network of officials and contractors who had turned war into a business model. But the scope of their power was also becoming clear. They had resources, connections, and ruthlessness that made them extraordinarily dangerous opponents. He opened his laptop and began researching Jennifer Kim. Her official biography was sparse. CIA analyst from 2005 to 2018, specialist in Middle Eastern politics and terrorism, holder of multiple commendations for analytical excellence. Her career had ended abruptly in 2018, officially due to restructuring, but actually because she had begun questioning intelligence assessments that supported continued military involvement in Syria. Finding her current whereabouts would be nearly impossible. Unlike Dr. Drex and Marcus Webb, who had maintained some connection to their former professional lives, Kim had disappeared entirely. No forwarding addresses, no professional contacts, no digital footprint whatsoever. But Webb had mentioned protocols for contact, suggesting that Kim had established some method for people to reach her. Caleb spent hours searching through obscure forums and encrypted messaging systems, looking for any reference to her name or known associates. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a chess forum devoted to correspondence games. One of the players, using the handle Queen's Pawn, had a profile that included subtle references to intelligence terminology and Middle Eastern politics. The writing style was academic, precise, and paranoid in a way that suggested professional training. Caleb created an account and sent a carefully worded message. Interested in discussing historical chess games, particularly those involving echo chambers and speculative strategies. Have mutual acquaintances in the analysis community. The response came 12 hours later. Chess is a game of infinite complexity, where past patterns inform future strategies. Some players study historical games to understand systematic approaches to sustained positional advantage. Correspondence games allow for careful consideration of moves and counter-moves. The message included a link to a chess game archive, with a notation that a particular game contained interesting commentary on strategic planning. Caleb downloaded the game file and discovered that the commentary contained what appeared to be contact instructions, a series of geographic coordinates, a time reference, and a phrase that needed to be used to establish credibility. The coordinates led to a small park in Bethesda, Maryland. The time reference indicated the third Thursday of each month, 3 p.m. The phrase was, "I've been studying the Damascus Gambit." Caleb spent the next week preparing for the meeting. He studied everything he could find about Jennifer Kim's background, practiced explaining his research in concise terms, and developed contingency plans in case the meeting went wrong. The park in Bethesda was small and well maintained, with walking paths that curved around a central pond. At exactly 3 p.m. on the designated Thursday, Caleb positioned himself on a bench near the water, trying to look casual while scanning the area for potential threats or surveillance. She appeared without warning, settling onto the bench beside him as if they had planned to meet. Jennifer Kim was younger than he had expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that suggested professional training in blending into crowds. Her eyes, however, were alert and calculating, constantly scanning their surroundings. "You mentioned the Damascus Gambit," she said without preamble. "I've been studying historical patterns in strategic decision-making, particularly how certain games seem designed to continue indefinitely, rather than reach natural conclusions." Kim was quiet for a moment, watching a family of ducks paddle across the pond. "What do you want?" "Information about Echo Spectre, about how the network operates currently, not just historical records." "Why should I trust you?" Caleb pulled out his phone and showed her the memo he had found in the archives. "Because I've seen the documentation, because I understand what they're doing, because I think you want them stopped as much as I do." Kim read the memo carefully, her expression never changing. "This is nothing. A fragment of a much larger system. Do you have any idea what you're dealing with?" "I'm learning. I've spoken with Dr. Drex and Marcus Webb. I've heard Rhodes's briefings. I know the network is still active." "Active?" Kim laughed bitterly. "They're not just active. They're expanding. The end of the Afghanistan war didn't reduce their influence. It forced them to evolve. They've moved beyond traditional conflicts into cyber warfare, proxy conflicts, and manufactured crises." "What do you mean?" Echo Spectre was never just about prolonging existing wars. It was about creating new ones. The network has developed sophisticated methods for identifying potential conflict zones and then encouraging instability. Kim stood and began walking along the path, forcing Caleb to follow. They use artificial intelligence to analyse global political and economic data, looking for regions where small interventions could create large-scale conflicts. Then they deploy what they call catalyst operations to push those regions toward violence. Catalyst operations? False flag attacks, manufactured intelligence, strategic assassinations, cyber attacks attributed to foreign powers, anything that can spark conflict between groups that might otherwise coexist peacefully. They had reached a more secluded part of the park, where the walking path curved away from the main areas. Kim stopped and turned to face him directly. The Syrian conflict was a test case. They identified ethnic and religious tensions, then amplified them through selective intelligence leaks and strategic provocations. The result was a civil war that lasted for years and generated billions in defence contracts. You're talking about deliberately starting wars. I'm talking about war as a managed resource. The network doesn't just profit from existing conflicts. They create new ones when market conditions are favourable. Caleb felt sick. How many people have died because of their operations? Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. But they don't see it that way. They see it as market optimization, as managing global instability for maximum profit. We have to stop them. We? Kim's voice was sharp with suspicion. There is no we. I've been running from these people for 5 years. They've tried to kill me 3 times, and they've successfully eliminated everyone else who posed a serious threat. But you're still alive. You're still fighting. I'm still alive because I'm very good at hiding and very good at killing, but I'm not fighting anymore. I'm just trying to survive. Kim began walking again, this time toward the park's exit. You should go home, Mr. Voss. Forget what you've learned. Find a new job, preferably somewhere far from Washington. Because if you continue down this path, you'll end up like all the others. What others? The journalists who died in car accidents, the whistleblowers who committed suicide, the analysts who had heart attacks at unusually young ages. The network doesn't just destroy careers, Mr. Voss. When careers aren't enough, they destroy lives. They had reached the parking area. Kim turned to face him one last time. I'll give you one piece of advice. If you're determined to pursue this, you need insurance. Some way to ensure that the information reaches the public, even if you're eliminated. The network's greatest fear is exposure, but only if that exposure is comprehensive and undeniable. What kind of insurance? A dead man's switch, an automated system that releases everything if you fail to check in regularly. I built something like that 5 years ago, but I never had enough evidence to make it worthwhile. Kim reached into her jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. This contains everything I managed to gather before I went underground. Technical specifications for catalyst operations, financial records, operational plans. Combined with what you've already found, it might be enough. Enough for what? To bring down the entire network, but only if you're willing to risk everything. And I mean everything, Mr. Voss. Your career, your reputation, your life. She handed him the USB drive and turned to leave. Good luck. You're going to need it. The USB drive from Jennifer Kim contained terabytes of data, encrypted files, financial records, operational plans and correspondence that revealed the true scope of the EchoSpectre network. Caleb spent a week decrypting and analysing the information, working late into the night in his apartment with the curtains drawn and his phone turned off. What he found was more disturbing than anything he had previously discovered. The network wasn't just prolonging existing conflicts or creating new ones. They were systematically destabilising entire regions of the world, using artificial intelligence and psychological warfare to turn ethnic, religious and political differences into profitable violence. The AI system, called Prometheus, analysed global political and economic data to identify regions where small interventions could create large-scale conflicts. The system considered factors like ethnic composition, economic inequality, historical grievances and political instability, then calculated the probability that various catalyst operations would successfully spark violence. Once Prometheus identified a target, the network would deploy a combination of false flag attacks, manufactured intelligence, strategic assassinations, and cyber operations to push the region toward conflict. The operations were designed to look like natural outbreaks of violence, but they were actually carefully orchestrated campaigns to create profitable instability. The Syrian conflict had been a test case, but it was far from the only example. Kim's files documented similar operations in Ukraine, Myanmar, Ethiopia, and Venezuela. Each conflict had been sparked by EchoSpectre operations and then sustained through continued interventions designed to prevent resolution. But the most chilling discovery was the network's current focus, the United States itself. Prometheus had identified growing political polarization and social unrest as opportunities for profitable instability. The network was actively working to amplify divisions between different political, ethnic and economic groups, hoping to create conditions for domestic conflict that would justify expanded surveillance and security spending. Caleb printed the most damning documents and organised them into a comprehensive evidence package. He had financial records showing money flows between defence contractors and government officials, operational plans detailing specific catalyst operations, and correspondence revealing the network's true objectives. Combined with the materials from Dr. Drex and Marcus Webb, he had enough evidence to expose the entire system. But Kim's warning about insurance had been prescient. The moment he finished organising the evidence, Caleb realised that his own safety was in jeopardy. The network knew he was investigating, and they would respond aggressively once they understood the scope of what he had discovered. He needed a dead man's switch, some way to ensure that the information would reach the public even if he was eliminated. The solution came from an unexpected source: Doctor. Drex had mentioned something called the Atlas Protocol during their first meeting. A quick internet search revealed that it was a secure document release system designed by privacy advocates and whistleblowers. The Atlas Protocol worked like a sophisticated dead man's switch. Users could upload encrypted documents to a distributed network of servers, then establish check-in protocols that would automatically release the documents if the user failed to confirm their safety within specified time periods. The system was designed to be resistant to shutdown attempts, using blockchain technology and redundant servers to ensure that information could not be suppressed. Caleb spent 2 days setting up his Atlas Protocol account, uploading encrypted copies of all the evidence he had gathered, and establishing check-in requirements that would release the documents if he failed to respond within 72 hours. He also created multiple backup systems, sending copies of the evidence to secure email accounts and cloud storage services that would automatically distribute the information to journalists and media outlets. With his insurance in place, Caleb began reaching out to reporters and media organisations. He contacted investigative journalists at major newspapers, television networks, and online publications, offering them exclusive access to evidence of systematic war profiteering and manufactured conflict. The response was immediate and alarming. Within hours of his first contact, several journalists reported that they had been contacted by their editors and told to drop the story. Others found their sources suddenly unavailable, or their access to classified information restricted. The network was mobilizing its resources to suppress the information before it could reach the public. But Caleb had expected this response. Instead of relying on traditional media, he began reaching out to independent journalists, foreign news organizations, and alternative media platforms that were less susceptible to pressure from the network. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the European investigative journalist named Lars Anderson, who worked for a consortium of international news organizations. Anderson had been investigating similar patterns of defense contractor influence in European conflicts, and he immediately recognized the significance of Caleb's evidence. "This is extraordinary," Anderson said during their encrypted video call. "You've documented a systematic effort to profit from manufactured conflict on a global scale. This could bring down governments." "That's what I'm hoping for," Caleb replied. "But I need to move quickly. The network knows I'm investigating, and they're already trying to suppress the story." "How much time do we have?" "I don't know. Days? Maybe weeks. But I've set up insurance systems that will release everything if something happens to me." Anderson was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "I can coordinate with my network to ensure simultaneous publication across multiple countries. That will make it much harder for them to suppress the story." "What do you need from me?" "Everything. All the documents, all the evidence, all the sources. We'll need to verify everything independently, but if what you're telling me is accurate, this will be the biggest story of the decade." Caleb spent the next week working with Anderson and his team, providing additional documentation and helping them verify the authenticity of the evidence. The process was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time since he had discovered the Echo Spectre references, he felt like he was making progress toward exposing the truth. But the network was also making progress. Webb called to warn him that surveillance around his apartment had increased significantly. Dr. Drex reported that her yoga studio had been visited by men claiming to be building inspectors. Even Kim, who had been silent for weeks, sent a coded message warning that the chess game was entering its final phase. The pressure was building toward a confrontation, and Caleb knew that he was running out of time. The network would not allow him to continue his investigation indefinitely. They would either buy him off, discredit him, or eliminate him. The only question was when and how they would act. The answer came sooner than expected. Caleb arrived at work on a Tuesday morning to find his security clearance had been suspended pending a routine review. His supervisor, normally friendly and supportive, was formal and distant, explaining that the review was standard procedure and that Caleb should not be concerned. But Caleb knew better. The clearance suspension was the first step in a process that would end with his termination and professional destruction. The network was moving against him, and they were following their standard playbook. He cleaned out his desk quickly, taking only personal items and leaving his work computer untouched. He had already copied everything he needed, and he didn't want to give them any excuse to search his belongings or question his activities. As he left the Xeroxon building for the last time, Caleb noticed the surveillance team that had been watching him for weeks. They were being less subtle now, clearly visible in their dark SUVs and professional attire. The message was clear. They knew what he was doing, and they were prepared to escalate. That evening, Caleb received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice was professionally pleasant, but carried an undertone of threat. "Mr. Voss, this is Michael Harrison from Strategic Influence Associates. I believe you know our founder, Harlan Rhodes. We'd like to meet with you to discuss some research you've been conducting." "I'm not interested in meeting." I think you should reconsider. We have a very generous offer that would resolve your current difficulties while providing you with excellent opportunities for career advancement. What kind of offer? A consulting position with our firm. Excellent salary, full benefits, and the opportunity to work on fascinating projects involving geopolitical analysis. All we would need is your commitment to confidentiality regarding certain sensitive matters. Caleb understood the subtext. They were offering him a choice: join the network or be destroyed by it. I'll need to think about it. Of course, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely. The line went dead. Caleb stared at his phone, understanding that he had just been given an ultimatum. The network had made their move, and now he had to decide how to respond. He called Lars Anderson immediately. They've made contact. They're trying to buy me off. What did you tell them? That I needed to think about it, but I don't think they believe me. How much time do we have? Not much. Maybe days. How's the verification process going? We're almost finished. Another 48 hours and we can go to publication. Will that be enough time? It has to be. But you need to be very careful until then. They're not going to wait much longer. Caleb spent the next day making final preparations. He updated his Atlas protocol settings to reduce the check-in requirement to 24 hours, ensuring that the documents would be released quickly if something happened to him. He also sent final copies of the evidence to backup contacts, creating multiple redundant systems that would make it nearly impossible for the network to suppress the information. But he also knew that the network had resources he couldn't match. They had access to government databases, surveillance systems, and operational capabilities that made them extraordinarily dangerous. If they decided to eliminate him, they would probably succeed. The attack came at 3 a.m. on Thursday morning. Caleb was awakened by the sound of his apartment door being forced open. He had been expecting this moment, and his response was immediate and decisive. He grabbed the emergency bag he had prepared and headed for the fire escape, moving quickly but quietly through his apartment. Behind him, he could hear voices and footsteps as the intruders searched his home. The fire escape led to an alley behind his building, where he had hidden a motorcycle several days earlier. He started the engine and drove quickly through the empty streets, heading for a safe house that Dr. Drex had established in a suburb of Baltimore. As he drove, Caleb received a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. The situation has changed significantly." HR. Harlan Rhodes himself was making contact. The network was escalating beyond their normal operational parameters, which suggested they were becoming desperate, but it also meant they were becoming more dangerous. Caleb arrived at the safe house as dawn was breaking. The building was a modest ranch house in a quiet neighbourhood, the kind of place that attracted no attention from neighbours or passers-by. Dr. Drex was waiting for him, along with Marcus Webb and, surprisingly, Jennifer Kim. "They hit my apartment too," Webb said as Caleb entered, "and they've been watching Drex's yoga studio. They're moving against all of us simultaneously." "Which means we're close to something they can't allow to be exposed," Kim added. "They don't take these kinds of risks unless they're facing an existential threat." "The publication is scheduled for tomorrow," Caleb said. "Lars Anderson and his team have verified everything. Once the story breaks, the network will be exposed globally." "If we survive that long," Dr. Drex said grimly, "they're not going to wait passively for their destruction. They'll escalate as far as necessary to protect themselves." As if to emphasize her point, Caleb's phone rang. Harlan Rhodes' voice was no longer professionally pleasant. "Mr. Voss, you've made a serious mistake. We offered you a reasonable solution to your situation, but you've chosen to escalate instead. That was unwise." "I'm not interested in your solutions." "You should be, because the alternative is much less pleasant for everyone involved, including your new friends." The line went dead. Kim immediately began checking her weapons and surveillance equipment. "He's telling us that negotiations are over," she said. "From now on it's a war." The safe house had been prepared for exactly this situation. Dr. Drex had spent months setting up the location, installing security systems, stockpiling supplies, and creating multiple escape routes. The building was equipped with encrypted communication systems, surveillance equipment, and enough provisions to sustain 4 people for several weeks. But they all knew that time was not on their side. The network had resources that made them extraordinarily dangerous, and they were clearly prepared to escalate beyond their normal operational parameters. The attack on their homes had been a warning. The next phase would be more aggressive. "We need to accelerate the publication timeline," Caleb said, as they gathered in the safe house's main room. "Every hour we delay gives them more time to prepare countermeasures." "Anderson's team is working around the clock," Dr. Drex replied. "But they want to be absolutely certain that every piece of evidence is verified and authenticated. A story this big can't have any weaknesses." "What about the Atlas Protocol?" Webb asked. "If something happens to us, will the documents still be released?" "The system is designed to be autonomous," Caleb confirmed. "If I don't check in within 24 hours, everything gets released automatically to multiple media outlets worldwide." Kim looked up from her laptop where she had been monitoring network communications. "That might not be enough. They're mobilizing significant resources to suppress the story. I'm seeing coordination between government agencies, private security firms, and media organizations." "What kind of coordination?" "Pressure on editors, threats against journalists, technical attacks on publication systems. They're preparing to use everything they have to prevent the story from reaching the public." "Can they succeed?" "Against traditional media, maybe, but Anderson's using an international consortium with servers in multiple countries. It would be very difficult to suppress the story completely." The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the security system. Multiple vehicles were approaching the safe house, moving in a coordinated pattern that suggested professional surveillance or assault teams. "Time to go," Kim said, grabbing her emergency bag. "They found us faster than I expected." The safe house had 3 escape routes: a tunnel that led to a drainage system, a hidden exit through the garage, and a rooftop extraction point. They chose the tunnel, moving quickly through the basement and into an underground passage that Dr. Drex had constructed over several months. As they moved through the tunnel, they could hear vehicles surrounding the safe house above them. The network had deployed significant resources to capture them, which suggested they were becoming increasingly desperate. The tunnel led to a storm drain that emptied into a creek nearly a mile from the safe house. They emerged in a wooded area, muddy and exhausted but alive. Kim immediately began checking her communication devices for any indication that they had been tracked. "We're clean for now," she said, "but they'll expand their search pattern quickly. We need to find another secure location." "I have a backup site, Doctor," Drex said. "An old cabin in the mountains, completely off the grid. It's about 2 hours from here." They made their way to a parking area where Dr. Drex had left a vehicle, driving carefully through back roads and avoiding any routes that might be monitored. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by forest and accessible only by a narrow dirt road. Once they were settled in the cabin, Caleb attempted to contact Lars Anderson. The encrypted communication system connected immediately, and Anderson's voice was tense with urgency. "Caleb, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. The situation has escalated significantly." "What's happening?" "They're trying to shut down the publication. My editors are receiving pressure from government officials. My sources are being threatened, and our technical systems are under cyber attack." "Can you still publish?" "Yes, but we need to move immediately. Another 12 hours and they might be able to prevent publication completely." "What do you need from me?" "Final verification of the most sensitive documents, and a statement from you explaining how you discovered the evidence and why you're willing to risk everything to expose it." Caleb spent the next hour working with Anderson's team, providing final verification and recording a detailed statement about his investigation. The statement would serve as both explanation and insurance, ensuring that the public understood the significance of the evidence even if he was eliminated. As he finished the recording, Kim received an encrypted message on her secure communication system. Her expression darkened as she read the contents. "It's from one of my former colleagues at the CIA," she said. "Someone I trust completely. The network has issued a kill order for all of us." "A kill order?" "Official authorization for lethal action. They're not planning to arrest us or discredit us. They're planning to eliminate us." The weight of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. They had crossed a line that the network considered existential. From now on, it would be a fight for survival. "How much time do we have?" Webb asked. "Hours, maybe less. They're mobilizing military contractors and intelligence operatives, people with serious operational capabilities." "What about the publication?" Anderson's team is working to accelerate the timeline. They want to publish within 6 hours. Caleb updated his Atlas protocol settings, reducing the check-in requirement to 6 hours and adding additional redundancy systems. If they were eliminated, the evidence would still reach the public, but they needed to survive long enough for the initial publication to gain traction. The attack came at sunset. Kim's security systems detected the approaching vehicles while they were still miles away, giving them enough warning to prepare defensive positions around the cabin. But they all knew that 4 people with limited weapons couldn't hold off a professional assault team for long. "We need to buy time," Kim said, as she distributed weapons and ammunition. "If we can hold them off for a few hours, Anderson's publication might create enough public pressure to protect us." "What if it doesn't work?" Caleb asked. "Then we make sure that our deaths serve a purpose. The Atlas protocol will release everything, and the public will know that we were killed to prevent the truth from emerging." The first assault came from 3 directions simultaneously. Professional mercenaries in tactical gear moved through the forest with military precision, using night vision equipment and coordinated communications. The cabin's defensive preparations held them off for the first hour, but ammunition was running low and the attackers were clearly prepared for a prolonged siege. During a brief lull in the fighting, Caleb's phone rang. Harlan Rhodes' voice was cold and businesslike. "Mr. Voss, this is your final opportunity to resolve this situation peacefully. Surrender now, and we can arrange for your safe passage to a location where you can live quietly without causing further problems." "What about the others? They've chosen their path, but you still have options. I'm not interested in your options." "Then you've chosen to die for nothing. The publication will never happen. We have resources you can't imagine." The line went dead. Caleb rejoined the others at their defensive positions, understanding that the network had abandoned any pretense of restraint. The second assault was more aggressive, with the attackers using explosives and heavy weapons to breach the cabin's defences. Dr. Drex was wounded in the initial barrage, and it became clear that they couldn't hold their positions much longer. "We need to retreat to the backup position," Kim said, helping Dr. Drex move toward the cabin's rear exit. "There's a cave system about half a mile from here. We can hold them off there until help arrives." "What help?" Webb asked. "Anderson's story goes live in 2 hours. Once it's published, we become too valuable to kill. They'll need us alive to minimize the political damage." They made their way through the forest toward the cave system, moving as quickly as possible while supporting Dr. Drex behind them. The cabin was being systematically destroyed by the assault team, but they had bought themselves precious time. The caves were narrow and defensible, with multiple passages that could confuse pursuing attackers. They established a defensive position near the main entrance, setting up the remaining weapons and communication equipment. As they waited for the next assault, Caleb's phone received a text message from Lars Anderson. "Going live in 30 minutes. The story is verified and ready. You've changed history." The final assault came just as the publication deadline approached. The attackers had brought additional equipment and personnel, clearly intending to end the situation quickly. But they also seemed more cautious, as if they had received new orders about the value of taking prisoners. The fighting was intense but brief. The narrow cave passages limited the attackers' advantages, and the defenders' desperation gave them strength they didn't know they possessed. When the shooting stopped, half the assault team was dead or wounded, and the survivors were retreating through the forest. As dawn broke, Caleb's phone rang again. This time it was Lars Anderson, and his voice was triumphant. "It's done. The story is published simultaneously in 12 countries. The evidence is public and the network is exposed." "What's the reaction?" "Explosive. Government officials are calling for investigations, defense contractors' stock prices are collapsing, and media outlets worldwide are picking up the story. You've started something that can't be stopped." Through the cave entrance, they could see helicopters approaching, but these were news helicopters, not military assault vehicles. The publication had changed the dynamics of the situation completely. "Are we safe?" Dr. Drex asked, her voice weak from blood loss. "For now," Kim replied. "They can't kill us now that we're public figures, but they'll try other approaches. Character assassination, legal challenges, attempts to discredit the evidence." "Let them try," Caleb said. "The The truth is out there now, and the truth has a way of protecting itself. 6 months after the publication of what became known as the Exposé papers, the world had changed in ways both subtle and dramatic. Congressional hearings were ongoing, defense contractors were facing criminal investigations, and several high-ranking officials had been arrested or forced to resign. The network that had profited from perpetual conflict was being systematically dismantled. But the change came at a cost. Caleb Voss had become a public figure, celebrated by some as a whistleblower and hero, condemned by others as a traitor and security risk. He testified before Congress, appeared on television programs, and wrote a book about his experiences. But he also lived under constant security protection, his life forever changed by the decision to expose the truth. Dr. Linnea Drex had recovered from her injuries and returned to public life, founding a non-profit organisation dedicated to monitoring defence contractor activities and preventing the militarisation of foreign policy. Marcus Webb had been vindicated in his earlier research and was working with congressional investigators to trace the full scope of the network's activities. Jennifer Kim had remained underground, continuing her work to expose other aspects of the military-industrial complex. Her expertise in covert operations had proved invaluable in documenting the network's international activities and connections. But the victory was incomplete. While the specific Exposé network had been exposed and dismantled, the fundamental incentives that had created it remained in place. Defence contractors still profited from conflict, politicians still benefited from campaign contributions, and the revolving door between government and industry continued to spin. New networks were already forming, learning from the mistakes of their predecessors and developing more sophisticated methods of coordination. The monetization of conflict was too profitable to abandon, and the lessons of Exposé would be applied to create more resilient systems of war profiteering. As Caleb sat in his new apartment, reading news reports about the latest congressional hearings, he reflected on the words of President Eisenhower's farewell address. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The Exposé papers had awakened that citizenry to the dangers of unchecked power, but vigilance would be required to prevent the emergence of new threats. The machinery of war was too profitable to dismantle completely, and too many people had too much to gain from its continued operation. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Defence stocks rise as new conflict emerges in Eastern Europe. The headline was a reminder that the fundamental dynamics of the system had not changed. New wars would emerge, new profits would be made, and new networks would form to manage the flow of money and influence. But there was also cause for hope. The publication of the Exposé papers had created a new awareness of how the system operated, and a new generation of journalists, activists, and officials were committed to preventing its resurrection. The truth had been revealed, and once revealed, it could never be completely hidden again. In a small tribute that appeared at the end of the final congressional report on the Exposé network, a simple dedication read, "In loving memory of Ava Merrick, and all those who sacrificed their careers and lives to expose the truth. Their courage made this investigation possible." The war machine they had built was damaged but not destroyed. The eternal vigilance that democracy required had been awakened, but it would need to be maintained against the constant pressure of those who profited from conflict and chaos. The invisible hand of the market had been revealed in all its ruthless calculation, and the citizenry had been warned. Whether that warning would be heeded remained to be seen. But for now, in this moment, the truth was victorious, and sometimes, in the struggle between light and darkness, that was enough.